Hey Instagram, Scott with Seaman Custom Builds here. On this video, we'll be showing how to assemble your laser engraver system. All right, so first let's assemble the frame. So we'll get our corner brackets. We're gonna need a screw and a nut in each side piece there. So if you go ahead and start them loosely, that way you can slide them onto the aluminum frame. Let's set our x-axis off to the side. So we've got our two frame rails. We have our thicker side rails. So we're simply going to slide our nut into there. And then the side rail to go with it. Snug it down a little bit. We'll fine tune this later. All right, so we have our frame done. We have the two extra nuts there, top and bottom. So let's just set this off to the side for now. All right, next, let's assemble the x-axis carriage and laser module. So we'll get our little laser. We've got our small screws. So on the side that has a long slot, we are going to, from the back side, doesn't matter now if you haven't labeled yours like I've labeled mine, put the small screw in to the top center hole. There's a small screw to the top bottom hole. And snug those down. So on the other bracket, we're going to grab one of our Servo Motors, and we're going to assemble it. Put that face down. We're going to grab 4 of the screws for that. And I would recommend having the connector face to the top, what we'll call the top of the bracket, the fattest part of this one. All right, so we've got that snug down. So the next piece we're going to work on is the wheel set for that. So we have 5 of these little wheels. Remember I said on the previous video we want the longer of the bolts. We have the nylon spacers. We have 5 of the wider and 5 of the narrow. There's going to be 1 per each wheel. And then we need the nuts to tighten these down to. All right, so now we're ready to assemble our wheels onto these panels. So we'll take one of the longer bolts, one of the wider bushings, a wheel, and a small bushing. We're gonna do this 5 times. It's gonna be a little tricky. Wide, wheel, narrow, wide, wheel, narrow, And then we're going to carefully match it up with the other panel. And add our nuts. Now we can take our wrench, our Allen wrench, and we can tighten these bad boys down. All right, now that we've got that done, we can set that aside. And we're going to work on our y-axis. Basically the same steps as before. Note on the template, there's 2 holes at the top. We want our servo motor to point up, the connector up towards those 2 holes. So we've got our mirror copy of each other with the servos mounted. Next, we're going to get our 10 smaller bolts, Allen head bolts, 10 of the narrower spacers, 10 nuts, and 10 wheels. And the assembly will be on the 5 holes below the servo. So these are a touch easier than that x-axis. So the bolt in from the backside where the motor is, a spacer, a wheel, and a nut, and you can tighten them down as you go. All right, so now we have our wheels all set. We're good on that. Let's set it off the sides, and next, let's put together the module onto its mounting plate. So we've got 4 of the smaller silver Phillips head screws, 4 of the tiny little nuts, and 4 of the tiny little nylon or plastic spacers. So it's pretty simple. We're going to drop screw through each hole. We're going to put a spacer on the back and then line it up on the module and thread it on, nut on. Do it too tight, you won't be able to get the rest of them in. Just tighten all those down, and we'll be set. All right, so the module's done. So let's set that back off to the side. Let's move our X-axis out and laser out of the way. All right, so we have our frame back up on the table. So now we're going to take our Y-axis carriages and we're going to thread them on to the double thick bar on each side and make sure they look like they mirror each other. All right, so we've got our Y-axis carriages installed on our frame. Next, we're going to get our 3 rubber strips that have the serrated teeth. You should have one longer one. That one's definitely going to go on our X-axis, so we can set that off to the side. We'll take one of the shorter ones. We're going to set it down in the groove with the teeth side down. We're going to roll the carriage over so we can pick it up. We're going to go over the servo, under, and we can keep rolling. That'll help bring it up to us. Now we're going to pull it down the length of it. We're going to repeat this. All right, so now that we have that set, probably the trickiest part that people have said, and I think I found the same thing, was you've got to put a little nut into that track to hold down the rubber strip. So sometimes it will slide in pretty easy. Sometimes it won't. If you're having trouble, what works well is to take the Phillips head screwdriver and you can push that down and use that to slide it in, and then you can always pull the rubber back if you need to. Then you'll put a screw in and that's going to tighten down on the track. And you want to keep the track fairly snug, but not so tight that the servo is having to work extra hard to get it moving around. And for the other side, put the nut in to tighten down their strip. We're going to flip our frame around. For me, I now have the side with the nuts I put inside the other frame to hold my modules towards me. And I say that because you're going to want to slide these nuts in a little further, because we're actually going to use those as a stop so a laser won't hit our module when it's running. And you can always readjust these later. Get that in, we'll tighten down this last nut on it. So now our Y carriages can't fall off. The next thing we'll do is we'll get the 4 leg brackets and the 8 smaller Allen head bolts, or shorter Allen head bolts. And each leg is going to be bolted on. There's threaded inserts in the end of that double aluminum tube. And tighten each one down. Okay, so we have our feet on. Our Y carriages can move freely. So again, I want to make sure I orient the end with the nuts towards me. So now we're going to repeat the same process for the X-axis. This is going to slide onto the tube with it facing up towards us so we can see the servo gear. We're going to take our belt and do the same thing we did down below. Under the first wheel, up over the gear drive, under the other wheel, and again we can pull it towards us and get it to sit in there. And then we're going to do the same thing again with the nuts in the track and a bolt to hold them in place. Alright, so we'll do that for both sides, and then we'll tighten them down with the screws. And if you have a bunch of extra track, when you're done, just cut that so it doesn't get in the way. So have that, and again, we want that belt so that the gear stays engaged, so we'll pull that slack out. So we'll get a screw to tighten down through that nut to hold our track down. Now we have our X-axis moving freely on its bar. So now we have this ready. So we can attach it to the frame with 4 of the shorter bolts like we used for the legs. And this has the threaded ends as well. We're almost there. The last thing we're going to do is attach our laser module and our control module. And remember, we put those nuts on that end. So let's flip it over and do the laser module first. Grab 2 of our screws. And I found it works best to have them pretty well centered on the frame. We'll get the first one started here. And we can slide it and make adjustments we need to get the other one to line up. And tighten them down. Flip it back over. And we have our laser module, so let's put 4 connectors facing in towards our laser. We'll get our nuts over here so we can line up, and our bolts to tighten that down. Keep them loose so we can slide it around to line up the other one. Keep them loose so we can kind of get it here in place. Like I said, centered's pretty good because you got to be able to get the cables to reach all 3 servos equal. All right, so the last thing to do is make our connections. So you've got a small connector. It's obvious it will only go into 1 port. Close at the control module, you'll see there's an X, Y1, and Y2. That's where you're going to plug in each cable for the servos. So now we'll plug in the servo motor. So you'll have our X. Bring that over to the X plug I showed you. Y1, Y2 doesn't really make a big difference. I would just have the one on the right, so that's Y1 go to the right, that way they're not crossing over. So there we go. One thing you want to watch is these cables don't get caught behind these bolts. You may also want to adjust those so that it's a stop before the laser would hit this module if it ever was getting that far down on a project. So your final connections, then you'll have your USB cable, and the small end will go here on the top. And your power supply goes right next to it. So I hope this video helped. If you recently bought a laser engraver or thinking about it and want to know what steps will be involved when you get it. If you have questions, any concerns, whatever, give me a direct message. I'll be happy to help if I can.